Hello and welcome back to this damn full idealistic crusade. I've been asked a number of times how I go about making videos, or how does one put together a Blu-ray review, for example. So I thought it might be interesting, or at least hopefully a little helpful if you decide you might wish to try making disc reviews of your own. Of course, all you really need is a camera, because it's merely your own opinion. But I have tried to make reviews that I do as comprehensive as humanly possible, which means I unfortunately can't always get to all the mini videos that I wish to do. And there's still a great many in my backlog, and I think of new video ideas practically every day of things I'd like to cover. But because I try to make reviews as detailed and as researched and as comprehensive as possible, they become projects in and of themselves. So for those who have wondered how I put together one of these reviews, or perhaps why it might take me a bit longer to get to a review, I thought it might be fun to just describe my overall process. And I don't know, I always like videos like this when people describe their processes, because it always helps me think about something that maybe I could do a little bit better, or I find pointers for myself of maybe some ways to work a bit easier, if you will, or hopefully maybe make a few things a bit less difficult on myself. Any way to make recording and editing videos and putting videos together a bit easier is always welcome. And so I thought I would just put together this rather short overview of how I do a Blu-ray review. And I tried to actually write it out in a list, so that way it was maybe a little bit more organized. It's not, terribly much when you look at it, but it's also much more than I realized when I started putting it into words. And it's also much more than what you get in most disc reviews, which is, again, part of the reason why it does take me a bit longer, because I want to put in my best effort possible and do my due diligence to really try and cover as much material as possible. Plus, I realized that I like talking about the actual films instead of just the physical media item itself. And so I get to do my favorite thing, which is, of course, film analysis, and talk about film history, the history of the particular film I'm discussing, doing analysis, my own feelings on the film and its production and all of the various aspects of its history, and then also discuss its video history and the technical side of things. So that's why my reviews are... I do put timestamps in so you can go to the section you wish to find, but I do try to keep them a bit loose and free form, so it still feels like an open conversation, like I'm having a dialogue with you on the other end of YouTube, wherever you may be. So that way there is some sense of a normal, intimate conversation between a couple people or two people that is still felt. So that basically doesn't feel scripted or rehearsed. But also, I want to get into as much of the technical details as I possibly can. I don't proclaim to be an expert in all fields, but I try my darndest to cover as much as humanly possible. So to just basically go over this little list I made of my own methodology and how I put together a Blu-ray review. Now, of course, the number one aspect, of course, is to get the actual disc you want to review and get it in hand and actually watch the film. That's always step one. Step two is, while watching the film, you have to take reference notes, or at least I do. It is very tedious, and I've gotten to where I try to only pause the film and write down something if it's, a very noticeable, like a particular bit of really bad damage, or a hair in the gate, or some frame movement, or a bit of digital noise reduction or something, or missing frames, for example, or a problem in the soundtrack. But when I do take notes, I do try to actually put down the timestamp. So when I go back and I'm preparing a review, I have my detailed list of notes with general timestamps for those particular moments, so I can go back and double check them when I'm actually working on the review itself. That is really, I think, a key factor in trying to make sure that you cover all aspects of a disc release, but primarily of a transfer itself. And that way you're able to reference things you might have spotted and would have forgotten about if you just watched the movie straight through without taking notes. That's not for everybody, and it is extremely tedious, and it does unfortunately detract from the movie watching experience. So I can understand not everybody wanting to do that. Usually I don't like to do that when it's a film I haven't seen before. And sometimes I just get so swept up into a beautiful new master that sometimes I kind of forget. And then I have to jot down my notes at the end. And I know some people do that anyway, and you may find that that works best for you to just write down your transfer impressions at the end of something, and then you can go back and then try to find the spots where you might have noticed something from what you can remember. But I do try to do that. I always take some sort of notes, whether it is during or my impressions after the feature, so that way I have something sort of set in stone to reference when I'm then recording a video or editing it later on. I have a frame of reference. Step 3 sounds pretty simple, but unfortunately it doesn't happen a lot of time, and that is to watch all of the supplemental features. Most reviews, when you look at them, they'll list the supplemental features, but not a whole lot of them actually go through all of them and then actually do a complete review of the special features. And obviously that takes time, particularly on discs with a lot of extras, but that is what you're supposed to be doing if you're doing a disc review, at least I feel. So I always go through every single last one of the special features, even the trailers and the photo galleries and things that people might consider just not that important, because if it is part of the release, it should be covered in a review, and I try to cover everything. It may take me multiple, I may have to come back to it. There have been some releases this year that had so many extras that I did have to break it up, and I had to watch a few extras one night and then remember to watch the other half of the extras over the next couple days or something. So even though it might take some time, that is very important. So you do have to go through all of the special features. Step 4 is along the same lines, but it's something that, again, I think even more than the extras will get listed but is not utilized, and that is the commentary track. I think you need to really listen to all of the commentary tracks of a release, even if there's multiple ones and you don't have a lot of time. I don't have a lot of time myself, and I still, for every release, go through and listen to every commentary track. I think it is important, and honestly, I think the truly great commentary track is pretty much the best extra any release can have. You can go into a lot more detail on a commentary than you can in a short featurette or a bit where you're just a talking head talking about a film. Sometimes the materials and the commentaries will kind of go over some of the same bits of information, but again, in a commentary you can get into much more detail, and because you have a longer space of time, you don't have to be so stressed out about getting everything into just 5 or 10 minutes. And so I think reviews that actually don't discuss the commentaries do people a disservice, because not every commentary is good, and there are a great number of commentaries that are just plain bad, so you have to sort of sift through them, and you can tell pretty quickly if it's, most commentaries are great, and you can tell very quickly if it's going to be one of those where you're just going to be gritting your teeth the whole time waiting for it to end, or there's a lot of silent gaps where they're barely talking at all, or they're just describing the events of the film itself, which doesn't help anyone and isn't a proper commentary anyway. But I do think that is important, so that's why I wanted to highlight it as a particular point. Step 5 is one that very few do, and this is part of why I make such detailed reviews, is I kind of got frustrated wondering about information and never finding it most places. Step 5 is to compare with older releases that I own, and then go on to investigate and obtain any other releases that might have significance or an audio track that I need to check out. So this is where it gets really tedious, because if it's a title with many different releases and I have to do some research and some digging, and then I find there's some different editions that I've not seen or might have aspects that I need to check out for a review to compare to the new release, that means trying to find an affordable copy to then compare. And then once again, I have multiple copies of the same film. But it is important to do because there are, of course, many releases where not all the extras are ported over. So some films you need multiple releases for all of the supplemental features. Sometimes there are transfer issues, whether it's color timing or DNR, or an older master might be better than a newer master, or vice versa. Sometimes it's, of course, the encoding of a disc of the same master from a different label. So there's sometimes other editions of the same master you need to get, such as, say, a UK import of a title that has a better encode than what's here in the US. And then, of course, there are older releases of catalog titles having better sounding soundtracks, so having better sound quality on older releases. And that's something I run into all the time, and I'm one of the few people who actually discusses this, but it's an unfortunate problem that still continues, that film sound frequently gets the same treatment as music in terms of dynamic range reduction, modernization of the audio with EQ applied, overzealous cleanup, and so you're losing parts of the audible noise floor and thus losing parts of the sound information. It varies, but there are many films that do sound better on older editions precisely for these reasons. And until you go and compare them directly, you're just simply not going to know what is the best sounding version. So that's just the that's really the primary reason why I started focusing more on always trying to look at older editions where possible. But I don't own all of these. I don't have access to all of these, so I do have to try and track some things down. And I have purchased even some VHS tapes on eBay, and I never thought I'd be doing that again. But yeah, that's also not cheap anymore with the rise in VHS culture all of a sudden. But I do, where possible, try to compare with older releases. Now, the next few steps are more on the technical side. But as for step 6, what I do, and this is only for Blu-ray discs because I currently don't have a way to really work with UHDs in terms of getting screen caps or being able to rip the audio tracks to then bring into sound editing software to look at more closely like I do with Blu-rays. So again, this is really just for Blu-rays as of the time being of recording this video. But what I like to do in this step is I will use MakeMKV to make an MKV backup, so then I can have a digital file to then make screen caps of, and then also extract audio to check. And then once I'm done, I delete said MKV. So this is merely to be able to examine the disc more closely and to also, again, bring the audio into an audio editor to look at more closely and to make the screen caps that I do for these reviews. So this is entirely for personal usage. It's the same process you would do if you were building a home movie server, which a lot of people do in this day and age. They like to rip all their discs to a lossless format and just run everything off of a hard drive or a computer that's a home theater PC, and they have just a gigantic movie server. It's the same process, but this is what I have to do in order to look at the audio and to make screen caps. And then again, once I'm done, I just delete said file, and then I'm always watching the disc itself anyway. So this is just for the purposes of review. The next steps are also about audio. What I do is I rip the audio tracks from that MKV, and I usually have to convert them to wave or FLAC for them to play nicely, and in terms of looking at them in something like Audacity, for example. And this is also where, if you don't have time to listen to commentaries, what I love doing is I love ripping the commentary track and then putting it on a portable media player. So that way I can actually be driving around in my car or just walking around with headphones on. Instead of listening to music or a podcast, I can actually be listening to an audio commentary that I probably normally wouldn't have time to sit down and watch the disc over, and so watch the whole movie 2 or 3 times over again just to hear the commentary track. And honestly, I prefer listening to commentaries without the film. I like being able to do that after watching the film, and then again in the next couple days while I'm just doing other things or driving around, listening to a commentary track and thinking about the film. So even when they reference certain things, I can visualize in my head, and I actually prefer that. So it's kind of like listening to a podcast in that sense. So that does take a little bit of know-how, but once you do it and you try it for yourself, I think it's actually rather helpful. And so that this is actually my preferred way of listening to commentaries. So for the most part, when I listen to a commentary, this is actually how I do it. I rip and convert the commentary track and just put it on my portable music player, like I was listening to a FLAC file, or if I downloaded a podcast and had an MP3 of it, or a FLAC file of it, and put it on my portable player. Same sort of idea. Again, does take a little bit of work, but I enjoy that, and it helps me actually be able to get through more commentaries than I probably would be able to normally. And then step 8 is taking the actual soundtrack itself and comparing it in something like Audacity or whatever sound editing program you might like to use, and trying to do a rough sync, lining it up with versions from older releases, whether it be DVD, Blu-ray, Laserdisc, VHS even, and doing a rough comparison of the audio tracks that way. This is really the best way to do this because you have everything right there. But saying that sounds simple, but of course that requires a lot more work, because for older analog releases, that means I have to do an audio capture of from a VCR or from my Laserdisc player, and that's in real time, so that's, at least 2 hours for most features. And then, of course, you have to process that into a WAV file, and then you have to sort of line up all the tracks roughly. It's very hard to do an exact sync of like 5 or 6 different sources that I get up to sometimes. But this is how I found at least a general sort of way to compare audio tracks. And this is where I know I'm starting to get into real territory most reviewers are not going to get into. So, but for the time being, I think this is probably the best way you can utilize to actually compare audio tracks. You can do the same just listening by ear and just A/Bing, between different sources. I still do that occasionally when I'm just wanting to spot check something, and as long as you get as long as you queue them up around the same time, you can get a sort of idea just switching back and forth with your remote. But it's never as precise as when you're doing it in a sound editing program. Now, steps 9 and 10 go hand in hand. Step 9 is then making screen caps of the disc itself. So this is where it's really handy to have a disc backed up as an MKV, because it doesn't have to actually because you can have the disc going, but the disc will have to spin up, and if you take a while taking screen caps, which I usually do because mine are very intensive, I'll admit, and I do quite a lot of them. I usually edit them down, so I don't use all the ones I take in a review. But for most discs, I find myself taking anywhere between 500 and 1,000 screen caps, and then I just whittle it down in the editing process and use maybe 300 to 500, depending on the disc, or if it's several films or a box set or something. But at least that way I have a whole bunch to choose from. And what I've primarily been doing is using Media Player Classic Home Cinema and just doing direct screen caps from there. I know there's a lot of different processes. I do them as lossless PNG files, and the quality is about as good as anything I've tried, but I know it's also very difficult to get an accurate screen cap. And I do those to try and give people an idea of what the transfer looks like and points I'm making. But I know YouTube compression and different things are going to be a factor. So they're really more guidelines for what you can expect to see on the disc. But I find it's helpful, just so long as don't take it with a grain of salt as you would any screen cap. So that's why I like to include those. And then the next step is to then take screen caps of particular damage that I noticed or transfer issues. This is where those notes with the time codes really come in handy, because if I had just written down, oh, well, in such and such scene, I noticed there was a hair in the gate in the bottom left, and it's like, okay, well, now I got to go find exactly where that scene is, and it takes a while to find what the actual time count is. I wouldn't know off the bat. It's at 18 minutes and 37 seconds, but if I'd written that down, that puts me in the ballpark, and then I might have to do a little frame stepping around to actually find that. But I do like to try and grab some screen caps if there were particular bits of damage or transfer issues that were really major that I'm making a point about. I do like to get an image of that wherever possible. Again, to give people an idea of what they're going to be encountering in this disc should they choose to purchase and then watch it. So that, again, same sort of thing, more screen caps, but again, focusing on bits of damage and transfer issues. Step 11 seems simple, but unfortunately, I don't think many people do this. And honestly, this may be one of the most important things, if not the most important. And that's simply doing some general research about the film itself, whether that's even something as simple as reading the Wikipedia article and reading the little paragraph about the production, reading the IMDb trivia page. What I like to do is just basically refresh myself on something, especially if it's something I'm well acquainted with. I have many film reference books, so I occasionally will go pull something off the shelf and flip to that section of a biography and sort of gloss over something I've read a long time ago and be like, oh yeah, that there's that funny anecdote, or this happened, and maybe look and see if anybody's written a nice newer article I hadn't come across online. Just a cursory search, or basically boning up a little bit on something to then make you think even more about the film and maybe come up with a viewpoint you hadn't had before, or just anything. But this is what I do anyway. I'm always researching films or thinking about films, so that's nothing out of the ordinary for me. But if I'm going to talk about a specific film, I like to at least before I go and record something, I like to bone up on it a little bit. Usually just, again, pull a book off the shelf, or if there's a biography I'd like to try and go read first, or, do something to refresh myself on it a little bit. That, I think, is really helpful. And again, I think even just a small amount of that might help people if they are going to do reviews, and especially if you have technical aspects you're going to cover. For that, you absolutely have to do that. If you're going to talk about a particular film format, or a particular sound format, or something that was short-lived, or roadshow films and 70 millimeter and 6-track magnetic stereo for all the 70 millimeter roadshow films, or again, anything in regards to various formats, that I think is key to at least do some cursory research or boning up beforehand, so that way you know what you're talking about. Even if it is just a refresher, I always think that's helpful, and that always gets my gets my neurons going, and refreshes me on something. So I like to try and do that where possible. Step 12 is, again, along the same lines. It's kind of common sense when you think about it. I like to glance around if there are any official reviews online, or if there's any discussion in a forum. I like to glance at that, really more to see if there's anything I've missed, and also to see what the sort of general consensus is, because sometimes you're not going to agree with that, or I might be seeing something that not everyone else is seeing, and then that makes me think, oh well, do I have something in my equipment chain I need to check? Is there a setting I might need to look at? That way you can double check yourself. And you can also participate in forum discussions and talk with other people and see what their experiences are. I find it helpful, and again, it makes me think about what I've experienced and looked at, and if I have any questions, I can sort of look at other people's opinions and then think, okay, well, I didn't necessarily see that, but I saw this, which I'm not seeing mentioned. So let me go back and look at the disc again. Maybe I missed something, or maybe maybe I got something wrong. Let me double check something. So again, I like that, to be able to double check yourself and your own findings, but also to see what the overall consensus is, and see how your thoughts kind of stack up against that. And again, it's like a nice sort of final way to double check your own findings, and be able to talk with other people. So I like doing that to at least a general degree, just to see what sort of the general consensus is. And a lot of official reviews don't really get into the technical nitty gritty, so usually it doesn't help me all that much, actually. But it can still be helpful, whether you agree with said review or not. And a lot of times there are a good number of reviews that I simply do not agree with. So that makes me only double my efforts to try and nail down exactly what it is that I'm looking at with any given release. Now, the next steps get into actually making the videos. So first, I like to try and come up with some sort of display background. I put the actual disc somewhere, and then I have relevant films or books or something. Just some sort of nice visual, so it's not just people staring at me for however long the video is. Again, I let the lengths are what they are. I never have a set length, and they kind of just dictate themselves. But I do try to put something together, and then I spend way too long trying to make sure there's not any glare and trying to get my camera straight and stuff. But once you start making videos, you find yourself worrying about things that seem completely trivial like that. It takes longer than you might think. Then I try to come up where possible with some sort of goofy intro. If you've noticed in some of my more recent videos, I try to come up with something directly tied to the film, usually me doing some sort of impression or quotation, and playing into the fact that I'm just a guy reviewing physical media disc releases on YouTube. And I try to poke fun at myself wherever possible, and indulge in my love of quoting films and doing impressions and things. So anytime I can come up with something goofy like that to sort of break the general idea of film critics being stuffy and things, and not wanting these videos to seem like stuffy film academia, basically. That's what I try to do, and to at least get a sense of humor in where I can. So if I can come up with a goofy intro that's within reason, I will try and do that, and then put it at the start to hopefully make people laugh, and then want to go through the rest of my babblings about classic films. Then next is, of course, actually doing the recording of both video and audio. Now, this is where you can get a lot of equipment, you can put all kinds of money into it, you can get really fancy with it, but at the end of the day, I realized very early on, it's still the same thing. It's still somebody just talking into a camera and trying to get over your nerves. Because until you start doing YouTube videos, you may think, oh, well, this would be easy. And it is easy for some people, but for me, it requires time and setting the block of time aside, and also getting my energy up, and then again trying to not have a case of nerves and things. So I am actually using my phone, because the quality you can get out of a cell phone camera these days is such that you will have to spend a significant amount for a more professional camera to even begin to outstrip the quality you can get in a camera. And there are a variety of third-party apps that do a better job than what the standard phone camera app will do. And I've tried a bunch of different ones, but I just basically keep it very simple with no frills, because, again, you can get a remarkable amount of quality out of a phone camera. Of course, when you use a phone and you're using the primary camera, you can't see what you're doing. And then that's when you have to come up with something. And a lot of people just use the front-facing camera, but that is a big quality drop-off. It's better than it was in phones, but I'm still not looking at myself. So what I did instead of buying an external monitor is I had an old PC monitor, and so what I do is I look down at it. I have it on a little tiny folding side table, and then I just use an adapter, which also has a charge port in it. So I have an adapter running from my phone on a tripod to an old PC monitor. So that's why it's a little janky, admittedly, but it does work. I was just able to buy a little cheap phone adapter, so I could just, again, plug into an old PC monitor I had laying around. But you can do a variety of things, and of course the easiest thing would be to choose the front-facing camera. The big difference is going to be in your audio, because audio is actually very important, and that's the biggest upgrade you can make. I really do think it's a good idea to invest in a separate microphone, which I did pretty early on. And nowadays, you can get amazing performance without having to spend a lot of money. It just depends on the type of microphone you go with. I've been using the Samsung Q2U for a number of years now. It's a USB and XLR mic, so you can eventually get better equipment and use it as the more professional XLR connection. But it also runs on USB, and it's a wonderful microphone for just doing voice, but you do have to actually get pretty close. So it's also hard to keep out of camera. I always like to have my microphone not in view, but I just have a simple mic stand or a desktop stand. So like right now, I just have it here and just pulled it up into the frame, but it's usually somewhere right below the camera. Doing this with an external microphone will of course mean your audio is much better than anything you'd ever get off of a phone. Although phone audio is now so much better than what it was that you can get away with using your phone, and the audio will sound pretty good. But again, you get more versatility out of using an external mic. But that means you do have to synchronize your audio if you're not plugging directly into your phone or your camera. And some people get clapper boards, some people get really fancy, but of course all you really have to do is slate yourself and just be really careful about syncing your tracks when you go to edit. It does make editing a bit more time consuming to do that and keep track of your two different pieces of media with your separate audio, but that's just it's pretty straightforward, and you're going to do that with most anything in video editing and syncing external audio. So I'm used to doing that anyway, so that's nothing new to me, but that's just what I do to have better audio. The next step is doing the actual editing process. I don't do anything fancy. I just pretty much edit out any flubs, mistakes, errors, clearing my throat, coughing, dropping stuff, because, you can be quite clumsy on camera or, you trip over your tripod, all that fun stuff. So it's basically cutting out all the goofs and the dead space and things, and trimming things up and trying to make my seemingly marathon videos sometimes at least a little bit shorter. But what I also do, I primarily use the editing program Shotcut if you're looking for a video editor. It's the best piece of free software I've ever found for video editing, and it is completely free to use. So it doesn't have every option you might want. It is very simple and no frills, but for what it is and the fact that it's free and it works and it doesn't limit your exports, there's really not anything better unless you actually jump up to one of the major paid editing software systems like Sony Vegas or Final Cut Pro and so on. But while I'm editing, what I like to do is I actually take notes once again. So like when I watch a disc and I take notes and I make a time code stamp of particular points, well, I do the same thing in editing. So that way I know when I talk about the disc itself, when I talk about the picture quality, audio quality, special features, any master problems, but also when I do the film discussion, I make timestamps of when I make specific points. So that way, when I finish editing and I have this nice lengthy list with all of these specific timecode points, I then do a second editing pass using those notes, and that's how I'm able to then lay in all the screen caps that I made previously. So that's why I try to make sure when I make specific discussion points in the film discussion, I'll try to find relevant screen caps from the film of that point I'm making and put that on at the requisite place. So That's why if you know the film I'm talking about, my screen caps sort of jump all over the place. They're not, the film start to finish. And I also want to make sure to try to never spoil anything in a film. So I never you really have screen caps of a film's ending and all that stuff. But that also means it's a whole second editing pass, and that takes even more time. And then I wind up worrying too much about, oh, did I use too many screen caps there? And should I put this here? Or should I put it here? Or should I put it here? But that also helps when I move to the next step. Once I have my review exported and done, when I go to upload it to YouTube, I've got that nice handy list with the timestamps, so then I can actually turn that into YouTube timestamps, which I started doing. And that's, I think, really helpful because that way people can skip directly to parts, or if they just want to hear about the disc, they don't have to hear me waxing poetic about how great said film is for however long I discuss the film or analyze it. So I try to always have those timestamps for people to go to the specific section they want to, or if you're wanting to, it's a nice thought that people might want to return to a video I make. But if somebody wanted to just hear about the audio again, you can easily do that. And I've already got the timestamp, so I know where it is, and I don't have to go find it again in the video file I've already made and scrub through to find, oh, well, where did I talk about the actual sound? So that's why it's helpful to already have that written down. And again, that's why I do it while I'm editing, so that way I have it for the next couple steps. And then the final steps are, of course, putting the correct title in and figuring out the tags for YouTube, and then putting it into the requisite playlists on my channel, things like that. So basically doing all of the YouTube side of things once it's uploaded. And of course, you also have to wait until it's fully processed and stuff before you upload it and jump through all the hoops and things. And then the last step is always making a thumbnail. And I do very no frills thumbnails. I like to think I've kind of made a style out of it, but you can, of course, make thumbnails any way you wish and make them really over the top or all kinds of different things. I try to make mine simple. My problem is I always have a tendency to want to put a lot of text in them. I have to try and remind myself it's not a PowerPoint slide, so it's an evolving thing, and again, it's something I keep tweaking and spend way too much time worrying about even the thumbnails. So again, anyone who's ever uploaded YouTube videos, this will be very, very well known, because I think anyone who makes videos also then when you start worrying about, is this too much text, or is the image a little too far to the right? Should it be bigger? Should I put an effect on this? Should I do this? You'll find yourself worrying about how much you've tinkered with something. For the thumbnails, I found the best thing is I actually use Canva, which is the wonderful online image design website. And you can make some really fantastic thumbnails with a free account. So that's actually what I've been doing. So it helps me make thumbnails, and again, mine are very no frills, so I'm able to do that with a free account. But you can get a premium account to do the fancier things, or you could just make thumbnails in Photoshop if you were into graphic design, or however you want to do it. But that's how I've been doing it, and that's what's allowed me to develop my style of simple thumbnails. So that's usually, again, the last step. So those are the steps I go through in making a disc review, and it's pretty much the same for all my other videos on this channel. My disc reviews are by far the most complicated and work intensive of any of the videos I do. I do a lot of this other stuff for the other videos. The process is the same. But again, for the disc reviews, they're really the ones where all of these steps go in, and especially with the screen caps and the audio comparisons and all that stuff. That's where the time factor really goes off the charts, and that's why it takes me so long. And then the pile of discs to review gets higher, and then I'm just like, I see all the hours of work stacking up as well. So I figured it might be fun, interesting, and hopefully helpful to people who may be thinking about doing reviews of their own. If you ever wondered how I put together a review, this is just my own working method with the equipment and time that I have to put these things together. And this is all to really try and separate the difference between, really great, fantastic Blu-rays and UHDs and physical media releases that are really worth and deserving of your time and hard-earned money, and setting those, in a positive light where they should be, and trying to promote works like this, as opposed to the opposite end of the spectrum and the very terrible or problematic releases that are not worth your time and hard-earned money, and in some cases are so bad they're infuriating. So that's the reason why I do disc reviews, is to really get into the nitty-gritty of things and hopefully get others to do the same and dig a little bit deeper, and maybe get some studios and rights holders to start putting in more effort, to put it politely, because quite frankly, there are unfortunately quite a number of them who do not, and it can't be left simply to boutique labels on small budgets to do the best they can. And then boutique labels, there is a significant difference between those who put the best quality effort they can into every release, and then those who seem to value quantity over quality, and those who simply have little to no quality in their releases. So there's a wide range in that as well. And so you really have to go to each disc, each release, on a title-by-title basis, and do the necessary research and put the time in and do real analysis. Not everybody's going to do that. Not everybody has the time to do that. I understand that, but that's why I started doing these reviews in the first place. So I thought it might be fun and helpful to go into some of my working methodology. So this is simply how I make media review videos, specifically for Blu-ray discs and now 4K UHD releases. It's not going to be how everyone does this, or everyone has a different working methodology. This is, again, simply how I put these videos together, and again, doing this for anyone who might be interested, and for those who have sort of asked me before what equipment I use and how I put things together. This is for you guys. So I do hope this has been helpful for, again, any of those who are thinking about doing disc reviews in video form, or any sort of reviews in general, or even just any sort of YouTube videos. It is a fun hobby. It definitely becomes, I mean, I kind of feel like this is my primary job anyway, because of all the work I put into it. But I have to have an outlet for this stuff somehow. I have no outlet for all the stuff fooling around in my head in my normal daily life, unfortunately. So this has thankfully been an outlet for me to do research and do film analysis that I'm doing in all my spare time anyway. So if you wonder what I'm doing when I'm not making videos or doing things like this is what I'm doing. So this is what my head is like. So I hope this has been fun and informative somehow, to hear how I put together a Blu-ray or UHD video. And I do encourage anyone who has even thought about making videos or starting a channel, just try it. You'll find your own way of putting videos together. There is no right or wrong way. Just make sure that you do it because you want to, and you get some sort of creative fulfillment out of it, or some sort of fulfillment out of actually being able to share your thoughts with other people, and just again, essentially do it for the right reasons, not simply to try and turn it into some sort of money-making venture, or being worried about trying to get monetized on YouTube and things like that. Because unless you become insanely popular for some strange reason, that's not gonna happen. So you might get monetized, but you're not going to make anything near the amount of time and effort and hard work that gets put into videos you might make. I know I certainly don't really get much of anything for the work I put into these. And it's another reason why I wanted to make this video, because I always hate having to say, oh, well, I've got this in the work pile, or I'm working on this review, or I'm working on that review, and it takes me so long. I hate having to say that, because I want to get more things done. But time is elusive, and when I do more and more videos that require a lot of effort and time, usually the easiest part is actually recording the video, it seems, and then I have to edit it and do the screen caps and everything. Well, back to work. You have no idea how much is piling up. So anyway, this has been how I make and put together and research a Blu-ray or 4K UHD physical media disc review. Again, I hope this is helpful to people considering doing their own videos on this particular subject or starting a channel of their own. And as always, do keep supporting studio and boutique labels by buying films on disc to help keep physical media and film culture alive. And thank you ever so much for watching.